So my name is Zach Pellecchia. I come from a company called Fortanix. And I've got over 2 decades of experience in IT, and over the last decade I've been specializing in ransomware and cybersecurity. And the last 3 or 4 specifically on data breaches. So I was lucky enough in my career to be introduced early to backup and disaster recovery before ransomware was a thing, and then see all the carnage that happened after that and live through it, which was great. So through that, I got to go into a lot of different customers and figure out how did those attacks happen at a time where nobody wanted to share that they got attacked. And so I kind of saw this as an opportunity that was missed because a lot of organizations wouldn't share their stories, and so other companies couldn't protect themselves with the same vectors of attack and things like that. So I was able to kind of collect that information, start looking at it, and then I realized there were some gaps in those solutions. So I'll kind of be talking about some of that today. So today we're going to be talking about cryptography. It's kind of like an introduction, and how you can use it to both enhance your security and secure sensitive data in different ways and interesting ways. This is kind of an up-and-coming thing in the market. All of you probably here, who's heard a lot about data classification, especially in the last year, right? So this is the next phase after data classification. I'll cover that in our slides as well. Cool. So when it comes to cryptography, there are the following problems that organizations are looking to solve. The first is mitigating leaks, both internal, which is referred to as confidentiality, and externally. The second is going to be secure data sharing. And then third, we'll talk about data resiliency, right? So, okay, I have this encrypted data. How do I make sure it's resilient? How do I simplify cryptography? So what's interesting to a lot of the students out there is that there's a huge gap in cryptography expertise in the field. So it's a great place to kind of go where the puck is going, where the industry is moving with this idea of cryptography and encryption. Secure authentication, something called non-repudiation, which I'll go into in depth, and then compliance. So I'll break these down kind of one at a time as we go through the presentation. So the first question, that is very small. The first question that you kind of have to ask organizations, or that organizations ask rather, is encryption a valid means to protect my data? Despite what you've seen in Marvel movies, where everybody's hacking keys and stuff, it is technically not possible today. Doesn't mean it won't be possible in the future. That's something we refer to as post-quantum computing. But no one's actually hacked an encryption key and been able to decrypt data in real life. There was an article that claims China has done it in the past 2 months, 3 months, but it was a very small key. Nobody uses keys that size. So again, despite what you've heard, this is a valid means to protect data. So the next question you should be asking yourselves is, why are you protecting the data and from who? Who are you afraid you get access to that data? So a lot of the different reasons are PCI, PAN, or PII, right? So you've heard of data privacy acts, the new ones that are coming out, things like that. How do I protect that data? If I leak that data, what happens? Data breaches are coming with fines now, so they're very expensive. With that comes reputation loss. Imagine I'm a small credit union and I leak my data of all my customers. There's a good chance those customers don't return, or they go to a bigger organization like Bank of America where they can feel more trusted, right? Target. I didn't shop at Target for 2 years after they leaked a bunch of credit card data. I don't know about you guys. So again, very important to the future of your company. Intellectual property. So imagine you're Apple and you have blueprints to the iPhone and exactly what it looks like, all the parts required, all that fun stuff, and someone was able to steal that information and make knockoff iPhones in another country or wherever and sell them, and no one could tell the difference between a real iPhone and a bad one. Now, not only does this hurt Apple, because there may be people returning what they thought was a real iPhone to the Apple store, but they're obviously losing sales as well, as people see, oh, iPhone for sale, it's half price, right? So again, these are huge problems that customers are trying to face. Internal threats, you're thinking, if you guys know Snowden, worked for the NSA, he had a thumb drive, took all this top secret information, leaked it online. I won't go into the details of what happened next. There's a Netflix movie on it if you guys want to watch it, but really interesting stuff if you don't remember that whole situation. And then the next is artificial intelligence. So I've been to a lot of CISO conferences recently, and the biggest conversation that everybody's having is, okay, I have AI, I can use ChatGPT and Gemini and things like that, but how do I know that once I've uploaded that data to those SaaS AI models, that somebody can't just ask the AI, hey, give me a list of credit card numbers for this bank, right? That's a huge challenge. There's really no way to solve it yet. Nobody's really figured that out. But if I can't use AI, then it's going to hurt my business, right? I can't figure out what to do with those AI models. So with that, with those problems, we have two types of data that we're looking at. The first is unstructured data. Unstructured data is flat files, like a PDF, a Word doc, Excel file, etc. And so the biggest problem with that is there's a lot of them, and they're spread all over a lot of different systems. And so there's really no answer, which is why everyone's looking at data classification as a solution. Tell me what's in my data. Tell me what's in my Word docs, my PDF files, etc. And the other option is I can blanket do disk encryption, right? Just encrypt the hard drives, right? That sounds like a great plan, but that only protects. Does anybody in here, like, ask the question, anybody in here encrypt their servers today or laptops? Yeah. Do you notice anything different once you're logged in? Right? So it only really protects if somebody steals the server. And that really doesn't happen anymore because we've gotten more advanced at securing the data center, right? That's part of our policy is physical security, cameras, check in and outs of these different servers and things. So again, it's not really a real option anymore. And in fact, it's called out in the new PCI DSS laws around credit cards, which I'll go into in more detail. So what can I do with classification, right? Well, I can get to least privilege. Well, can you? That's a really hard thing to do. If I'm talking about petabytes of data, I could have millions of folders with millions or billions of files. Who's going to go through all of those and say, this person should have access, this person shouldn't, this person should? So I was at a CISO conference recently, and one of the CISOs says, yeah, I have it. We classified everything. Now we don't know what to do, right? And then another CISO said, well, you just use user behavior analytics. So that's a very different term, right? So two classification tools. One that classifies the data, one that classifies it but then watches the user's behavior. So the user behavior analytics, I can do things like, hey, these users haven't accessed these files in 6 months. Do you want me to just revoke their access? Right? So now I can start moving to least privilege using some type of information. The other guy goes, I just go to all the managers and say, figure out if your people should have access to these files. There's a lot of folders, right? It's a lot of manual input. So then there becomes the question, is this good enough, right? Do I have to shuffle my data along, things like that. Now let's say I do a great job of this, and I have my folders narrowed down, and HR's got access to this folder, and security's got access to this folder, and everybody only has access to the files they need. Well, I work in sales. If anybody of you guys have heard of inside sales, their job is to go find people with IT director, CISO, security engineer, and have a conversation with them to try to sell my product, right? If I'm a cybersecurity expert, I'm going after everybody with the title of HR because I can probably trick them. I could probably do social engineering. And they probably have direct deposit information, social security numbers, all the stuff that I want from an organization, right? So I'm targeting them. I don't want access to the systems. I just want that one person that has all my good stuff, right? So what do I do then? So when you start layering on encryption, I can use like kind of an MFA concept. HR, you have access to all these files, open them on will. It doesn't hurt your day-to-day operations. Continue doing what you're doing. However, these folders have sensitive data. So when you go to open these files, like direct deposit info, which you probably are only going to do maybe once every 3 years when somebody has to update some information, you need to set up a second set of credentials, separate, right? So anybody in here have, for Active Directory, an administrator account and a regular user account? Have two? Yeah? Same type of idea, except you're doing it with the people that have access to sensitive data for different reasons. Making sense so far? Cool. So the second part of this is structured data. And this conversation I always find funny because by definition, structured data is structured. It's in a database. It's organized. So I really don't have to classify it. 95% of it is classified for me. So I've talked to a lot of customers that go, I have a tool that does file classification, but I have nothing that does database. Well, run a query. Have your DBA run a query. You'll know exactly what's in it. Because a database looks like this. It's broken down, just like an Excel spreadsheet. I know first name, last name, social, birthday. I know exactly what's sensitive and what's not, right? So why do I have to buy a classification tool? In certain circumstances, like let's say healthcare, there may be a notes field where you can put in anything you want, right? So a nurse could say, it was so-and-so's birthday today, burnt himself on a birthday cake, like whatever, right? Set his hair on fire, etc. So that information, I've now exposed this person's birthday. I may have used his last name in that note. So that is a reason to use data classification in a database. But if you've ever been on a website, most of the time you're limited to the fields you can put. It's a phone number, it's a credit card, and it does something called LUN checks and says, this credit card is a credit card number. We're gonna allow you to put it through. Anybody ever put a phone number in that was just fake and it was like, this doesn't meet the requirements of a phone number? Same idea. So I know exactly what's going into my database is what I think it is, and I know what I have to protect in that database, right? So it's something you can start protecting right away without having to go through the whole experience of data classification, which for some organizations can take over a year, right? So I can start securing things right away if I kind of know where my sensitive data is in that structured footprint. So then some things, once you start talking about databases, we get a lot of common questions, right? What is least privilege? Well, you can do least privilege. You can have a bunch of users that have a bunch of different access to the database and the different columns within it. But there's always a database administrator that has access to everything. So again, in my early example, I'm a cybersecurity expert. I use LinkedIn. I find the HR title. I'm looking for DBAs, right? They have all my good stuff. Another person I can target. Typically, they're not very trained in cybersecurity. It's getting better, but traditionally, they just know what they know, right? So again, those are people that are easy for me to attack. So the question's not only do I trust my DBA on a personal level, like is he going to take a bribe or do something to leak this information? Maybe he just has personal reasons where he doesn't agree with the organization's doing and he wants to leak stuff. But I also have do I trust that he won't get hacked? He won't fall for that phishing attack, et cetera, right? So this is a common conversation that keeps coming up today. Then you've got the application itself. That has a set of credentials. It needs to see all the data, right? So you've heard of a lot of these hacks happen where they steal authentication from the application that authenticates the database and they just steal the data with that. Same idea, right, as the DBA admin. It's a user that has access to all the data. So that brings up another question. Everybody hear about the Snowflake breach?
Yep.
Perfect. So Snowflake is another great example of do I trust my DBA provider, right? I gave them my data. They told me it was secure. They encrypted it in a way that wasn't secure or that the IAM didn't work well. It's a great example of this. Is just like with Snowflake, AWS RDS, Azure Database, they're all the same, right? If I have a credential to log into Azure AWS and I have access to the database, I can log in, run a query, and see all the data in that database. Very simple. My IAM is controlled with AWS. So if a cyber criminal can get access to IAM, they can give themselves access to the actual files and the data inside the database. That's not great. And you might say to yourself, well, I encrypt that database. Great, that same IAM gives them access to the key to open the database. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And this is exactly kind of what happened with Snowflake, right? I've seen it happen with a lot of these AWS databases as well. So again, let's dig into the database a little more. So this is what a traditional database looks like. Again, everything is in clear text, so you can see first name, last name, social, birthday, email, all of that, the profession, all in clear text. This looks exactly like an Excel spreadsheet, doesn't it? You know what that means? It can be, right? I can easily just dump this to a CSV file, an Excel file, and walk out the front door with it. All I need is to be able to log in. And there's not really a lot of tools that'll tell you if somebody did that. But nobody's really looking for that either. So I could just dump this whole database to an Excel file and walk out the front door, and I have all the information I want. Database, the only reason I don't use an Excel spreadsheet is databases are designed for consistency checks and for performance reasons, right? That's about it. Otherwise, it's pretty much identical. So what if we could change that, the way that looked? So this is what you'd call either de-identification of data, data anonymization, or what we call tokenization, where I encrypt data in the database, so not even the DBA administrators or the application or anything else knows what's in it. Now, again, this is just for sample data. So in real life, I probably would have done email addresses since their first name and last name. Probably would have done the birthday. But profession doesn't really hit PII. So imagine I'm a healthcare provider. I have blood work, any type of like diabetes diagnoses, cancer diagnoses, all these other things. I can leave those in the clear. And I can still search by those things. And I don't know who the actual patient is, but I could narrow the scope and I could use it to help me kind of get information, right? If I'm in banking, I could have all the deposits and the withdrawals, right? And so I could still use that information. And there's also ways where you can search encrypted data without decrypting it. The biggest problem with this today is most customers are doing it where they just encrypt the data and then they go to search and they're like, how do I find Bill if Bill looks like that, right? So we found ways where we can solve these problems, search the encrypted data, get only the list of bills, which might be 10 people, and then decrypt the 10 bills. So it's not decrypt 1 million records and then go find Bill, right? So it keeps the performance up on the database, things like that. This also allows me to set different permissions. So I can do things like, hey, support agent, there's no reason you'd ever have to see a social security number, maybe just the last 4. So I'm only going to give you certain rights to do decryption on social security numbers, or I'm going to give you none. Maybe they only need first name and maybe an account number or something like that they can use. But maybe the marketing department wants a birthday and a mailing address so they can send a happy birthday card every so often, right? So I can actually work with who has permission to decrypt what information and use it where, right? This also comes into play with applications. So I might have 2 applications accessing the same database. I want to be able to use that freely, but I might want to restrict it. So if I have like IBM's Power BI, it's a third-party product. I can't change the way they wrote that application, but I can give them a bunch of dummy data, have them return the results that I want, and then I decrypt it, and IBM never gets the actual patient records or the banking info or the PII data, PCI data, et cetera. But I can do anything I want with it once the Power BI's return the result. Does it make sense? Cool. And then if I want to lift and shift to things like Snowflake, great. There's a lot of tools that do things like this, but like Oracle has a tool that does something like this. But if I want to take that data from Oracle and move it to Snowflake, I have to decrypt that data and re-encrypt it. And then I have the challenge of, well, how do I know what's changed in my first database to know what to move over to the Snowflake? And so we found ways to, with the identification, find and merge duplicate info, stuff like that. So with this also comes a way to do secure data sharing and work with AI, right? So if I'm, what we see is a pharmaceutical company, for example, they may start an AI company to help doctors diagnose rare diseases. However, my challenge is the hospital can't give up the data because it's protected by HIPAA. And the AI company goes, well, I'm not giving you my model because then you'll just steal it and I have no product. So neither company wants to budge. And AI companies are going out of business because they can't get access to the sensitive data. So what if I just, again, tokenized it, gave it to the AI bot? They don't need to know people's names or credit card numbers. They can go filter through things, find the 10 people that they think have a rare disease, give it back to the hospital, and the hospital goes, okay, I'll decrypt these 10, and now I know exactly who they are. Or for banking, I could go find, are these people doing sex trafficking, money laundering, white collar crimes, et cetera.